Meanwhile, let's turn our attention to one of the things being commemorated this time around. It's 60 years since Australia's formal involvement in the Vietnam War, Australia first becoming involved mainly in a training capacity back in 1962. It was a long involvement in an at times controversial war. Joining me live is the President of the Air Force Association Victoria, Max McGregor, who was also a pilot in the Vietnam War. Thanks very much for your time. Great for you and the veterans who served in the Vietnam War at this 60th commemoration to have so many numbers back, people allowed out and about with COVID restrictions, all but gone in most states.
It's a beautiful day in Melbourne and the crowds have been magnificent. It's great support to the veterans who are marching today and the memory of the ones who could not march, that we lost overseas, which are always in our memory.
They are. Can you talk us through your recollections and your involvement in this war, first of all, what you remember of the time?
Well, I was a permanent Air Force employee. Remember, I was a pilot. We had trained on the Canberra bombers. They were old, and then the government committed our aeroplanes to Vietnam, and I served in 68 and 69 at a very large American base at Phan Rang, and we were 300 Australians and 10,000 Americans. So we were a very small component, but we achieved great results out of our efforts in Vietnam, something that I'm proud of.
And one of the crucial things always with the Vietnam War, it wasn't the first, I suppose, controversial war, one that had a mixed reaction back home. That would be more Korea, I suppose. But how has that affected Vietnam veterans over the years? And has it been encouraging that in recent years people have focused more on the service and not, whether or not governments made correct decisions?
Vietnam was certainly an unpopular war, and over time I think we've all questioned why we were there and what we achieved with our service, and the ones we lost, the 500 who lost their lives there, and all the ones who were injured, and not just physically but the mental injuries, the post-traumatic stress disorder that is now accepted, or generally accepted, as a problem. Not having a welcome home was certainly significant to all veterans, but I think over time that has healed, and it's not that those that were there fighting were blamed, they're now accepted. And that's something that I think is great for all Vietnam veterans, because, as you said, it was an unpopular war.
Yeah, and so what you mentioned there, but being accepted, and I suppose that comes on two levels with the Australian public and the difference between how a lot of veterans were met and greeted when they came home initially from the war compared to now, when the recognition is, as you say, people were going off and fighting for their country. And also, I suppose, was there an element of the veterans community as well that took a time for everyone to feel like they were more on the same page than previously?
Certainly, and that's, I think, just history that's kind of repeated itself over the decades. The reaction of some was that it wasn't a real war because we were doing 12 months service rather than for the duration. And there was a bit of that, but that's gone into the past. Now it's accepted. And I guess the challenge for the Vietnam veterans is to accept now the people from Iraq, Afghanistan, and all the peacekeeping forces, Timor, that have been involved. So we have a role to accept the new veterans into our brotherhood.
And perhaps be able to talk to them about that sense of belonging as well. The other big thing out of Vietnam is, previous wars. When you think back in particular, the First World War, it was really obvious who the enemy was. They were usually 50 metres away in another trench or 100 metres away, whatever it might be. But the aspects of guerrilla warfare and how much that became a mental scarring for the people that did return.
It's a very difficult war to fight. You don't know who your enemy is. You can't tell them. They are not in different uniforms. They're not in straight lines. They're everywhere. And maybe there's a message from what we're seeing in Ukraine at the moment that, yes, a powerful country can invade, but whether they could hold it in a guerrilla warfare situation from a group of people who did not want to succumb to that force of arms, it's a very difficult thing to control. And I'm just hoping that other countries will look at us and see what's happened in Ukraine and say, yes, we might be able to invade a country, but to actually hold it, if they do not want us there, is a very difficult thing. Afghanistan showed us that, and I'm hoping that maybe China and Taiwan will come to the same recognition that there is hope from what we're seeing in Ukraine.
It's a really good point and an interesting analogy when we talk about, the hearts and minds. So I think it's something to pause on and think about. Max McGregor, appreciate your time and thank you for your service as well.
Thank you, Tom.